right, that's it. We're leaving New York. We're leaving.
Why?
Because we could have 5 times the space for a fifth of the price in Kansas. Tell Katie, tell Nala, we're all going to New York, to Kansas.
To Kansas. I mean, we can do,
It's messy in here.
We don't have
it's
to go to
cold
Kansas.
outside. It's expensive. I just feel like it's closing in on me, man. I just can't take it anymore. Kansas?
We don't have to go that far.
I mean, if
that
you're
extreme.
For me, it's one or the other. Like, I'm going to be in New York and waste all my money on real estate.
Okay.
Or like, if I'm moving because of real estate, I'm like, okay, that's the reason I'm going to Kansas. And then I'm just going to hate my life and come back to New York. No offense to anyone who lives in Kansas. I'm sure it's a wonderful place.
Dude, you could go to like Colorado. Was awesome.
All right.
And it was cheaper and it was fun. You don't have to like suffer,
I know, but I like being unhealthy in New York. There's a lot of delicious food and no one, exercise. Well, people exercise, but it's not like Colorado where you feel shame if you don't, really
or Kansas, because like the first thing I think of when I think of Kansas is just
fit people.
Yeah, the health center of the world. I don't think I've ever been to Kansas. So,
well, we went to South Dakota for a tech retreat one time.
Yeah, which was amazing.
That was actually really cool for a vacation. And then like a few days in, I was like looking around and I just couldn't see anything but buffalo. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna be ready to get back to New York soon. Oh man. Anyways, New York's been fun, but it's like also cold right now, and it's that time of the year. Winter before Christmas in New York, I love. It's very romantic. It's very nice. January and February are tough. Everyone's sick. The weather's changing. It's cold. There's no more Christmas decorations up. Although it's been pretty sunny recently. Actually, we've had a pretty mild winter. To be honest with you, if winter was like this all the time in New York, even more people would want to live here because we had like 30 degrees, 40 degrees, sunny days. Now it's cold, but
yeah. I mean, these February is a tough month for the Northeast.
Well, that's when my birthday is, February 3rd. So, that's
so you got that to look forward to.
Yeah.
That can get you through January.
Yeah, another year older. Oh God. It's the last time I'll be able to say I'm in my, well, I guess, I don't know, I'll be 33. So that's still early 30s, but the first third of my decade will be done. So I'll still be in the first third of my 30s. So everything's still green light, go, make bad decisions, still got some time.
You realize that now that when you get to like 34, you'll be like, I'm still in the first half of my 30s.
Yeah.
Still in the first.
No, but that's like mid 30s. That's what it is. Mid 30s. 33. Is that mid 30s? I don't think so. So
people stop.
I'm not in my mid 30s.
Stop counting.
I'm in my early 30s until the following year.
Okay.
So early 30s.
Keep telling yourself that.
The thing is, in New York City, if you're in your early 30s, it's basically like being in your early 20s.
Yeah, that is true.
See, I was not in New York. I was in my late 20s and I was responsible. And then I moved to New York and I turned 30 and it was like I was in my early 20s again. And now I stay up till midnight, playing darts, getting offered drugs, buying pizza at 1 o'clock in the morning. I mean, just really, really responsible things, but it's a lot of fun. So as long as I'm in my early 30s, then good to go. Anyways, when are we going to make $1 million so we can buy an office 5 times the size?
Yeah. You don't like recording the podcast in a little shoebox?
Well, you do make it really nice. Ryan, I don't know if anyone watches this thing on YouTube, but you'll see our plants. You can see the plants in here, I think. Yeah, in our videos. Yeah, they look really nice. I have 2 plants at home right now that I murdered. Also, I Airbnb my place sometimes, so I that forces me to keep it all right. But like now, it's in a pretty bad spot. I have a palm tree, and like the bottom half is just like
it's
murdered.
Just dead.
Yeah. So I need to get whatever this guy is because he's cruising over there.
Yeah, plants are tough. I mean, like we buy these off Amazon, and I think half of them just die.
Have no chance from the beginning.
Yeah.
But you know what to do with the ones that work, so.
Pour water in them.
Okay. Anyways, let's
very advanced.
All right.
Yeah. What are we
Sam's mature.
Sam's
mature guy. He knows how to take care of plants and himself. We've been working on the homepage for MirageJS.com, which is getting really close to being done, and it's been fun working on it because we got the designs done by a professional designer, And I feel like as we've gotten into doing more stuff ourselves, transitioning from working at like a company and being more specialized to like doing our own stuff with EmberMap and Mirage and other open source projects we do, you know, we've learned more about the design stuff and yeah, a lot of that stuff is just stuff that we didn't really have to really deal with when we were more focused on like application architecture stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And now we're learning about like multiple background images, and like I probably knew that at some point, but it's like, what's the actual best way to implement this like pretty sophisticated looking design, you know?
That's interesting. If like when you bring this up, the thing I don't think of is what's the best way to implement this. It's like, what is the best design for this? Like just there's like little details, like with the Mirage JS homepage. There's a, you know, we had a professional designer do it. There's just a lot of little details that we never would have done in the past. Right. Just like a background with like little
dots or
little
lines.
dots that you can barely see.
Right.
But when you remove that, it looks weird. It
right.
looks like just like a plain white background.
Right.
So yeah, that's a thing that really that I really noticed when we work on this stuff.
Yeah, it makes a difference. And then because we haven't really done a lot of stuff like that, you know, I think both of us for a lot of our time doing front end web dev was like internal tools, so they look good, and we worked with designers before, but not to this level of the marketing site kind of thing, right?
Yep.
So then you're talking about like SVG assets, and so then, you know, maybe your designer gives you an SVG asset, and then the question is like, how do I work with this? There's a couple different ways, but then there's like a lot of SVGs from programs like Sketch don't actually work in the web the way they render in Sketch. So like SVG is really cool because it's portable. You can click copy and you get like all this code, but then it just doesn't work. So we spent all this time trying to get it to work.
Yeah, I know. I've been hearing this for years. Like, oh, SVG is great. It's portable and
standardized.
I think that I don't know it that well. Like I know there's people out there that like they can just write like simple SVGs by hand.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah.
So that's just like,
we did write a little polygon.
Yeah.
For that little
that
angle.
I struggled with there.
Oh, and then we got rid of it actually.
Yeah.
So that was an example where we used it to like, we have this vertical, like this cutoff thing.
Wait, I want to go back. Go back to this
ahead.
thing. Like that. I've never had like SVG is so portable.
Universal.
Yeah. SVG is great experience. Every project I work on, I kind of stumble with SVG. And we use SVGs. I'm not saying don't use them. It's just this whole idea that like someone can put an SVG in a sketch file and then I can get it on a website. I just have never had that experience.
No, I agree with you. So I think a few things there. First of all, is it fair to say like it's just like programming in browsers, and like if you try to do something with CSS or JavaScript in one browser, it might not work in another. And so that doesn't mean JavaScript isn't like portable or universal. It just means like there's differences you have to be aware of.
Yeah. Also too, like I'm not like, again, I'm not an SVG expert.
Yeah.
I barely know anything about SVG.
But
yes, I think that JavaScript analogy is perfect.
Yeah. So like one thing we learned was like you can use shadows, borders that are like outside or inside in Sketch. But in the web, really the only supported one is like a middle border or center border or something like that. So it just changes your design completely. So if you try to export that. Now I saw somewhere that Sketch was supposed to accommodate for this. And when they export to SVG, they actually like change it so that it works with a middle border or center border or whatever. But anyways, that's the kind of thing, you know, that was one of like 10 things that we noticed about this particular asset that we tried to use, and it wasn't rendering right in the thing. So right now we just export it as a PNG, and we're using that just to get it working. And we might bring it back to SVG. Now SVG file sizes are smaller, but then we also notice with some of the stuff, when there's lots of like filters and gradients and shadows and stuff, it can be really slow to render actually. It's like maybe the browser's actually way better, even though the asset size of the PNG is bigger. Browsers are so good at like rendering images and fetching assets, like that's actually the better way to do it.
Is the idea here that like the SVG is an instruction of how to render the image, so it's smaller, but the browser actually has to use CPU to like turn those like instructions into actual pixels, where like a PNG
is just
might be like just binary encoded. Like,
yeah,
here's the
I think
image.
so. And in particular, it was the blur, Gaussian blur on Safari. And given that the background lines, you can see them on MirageJS.com right now. Actually, if you open it on like a 5K monitor widescreen, they're going to be off because of Safari has like memory limits on what it will render there. Whereas like a PNG would work fine. It would just be a bigger asset. So that's the kind of stuff that's like. Also, it's just like it's like leaky abstraction details in the sense that you want your professional you want to work with what the professional designer did. You don't want to have to like
absolutely.
If I start looking at the SVG asset and I'm like changing the border or like the blur to do something that's going to actually work in the web, it feels crappy because I want to make sure I'm honoring like all of the little design decisions that went into that original asset. And so that's where I guess ideally the designer knows the web medium and understands what the constraints are. But in lieu of that, like what's the best alternative approach, you know? So I think like what we're doing right now to start is just making them assets like that are externally requested. Browsers are great at that. It's like really fast and like we can just optimize it later, you know?
Yep.
But yeah, it's pretty interesting. And like, no, I agree with you. Kind of the second point, my reflection when you were talking, like, I just don't feel comfortable or know really how to work with SVGs. It's like, you know, we used to use Font Awesome all the time and you just have like some text and you make an icon and it usually works out pretty great. It sizes it correctly. Then it's like, well, Font Awesome, there's like some issues with that, or it includes a lot of stuff, or you want to use different icons. Maybe your designer gives you some icons. So then it's like, well, you don't want like an icon font or whatever for reasons that other people have told me are good. But now it's like, how do you scale or like size these? So like someone gives you custom SVGs or you make one or you copy one. You know, Steve has like all these icon projects that are like great to use. And like Tailwind works well with SVGs. You can just like add width utilities, but like it's not exactly the same as making it match like the text. And so if you have like a little learn more with a little caret, how do you do that? I try to like pull it in and try to use Flexbox item center to like, but it's just kind of like what you were saying. That's kind of, I also feel that where it's like, if I wanted a consistent design here, if we were going to work on a bigger app with like a bunch of icons and make it easy to work with and size, you wouldn't want to just, you know, use SVGs and like widths everywhere. In a menu, it's one thing, but if you're using it with like text and stuff, it's another.
Yeah, exactly.
So the alignment stuff is kind of weird to me with SVG, I guess. Like, you know, if you have an icon, you know, we were talking about like the layout stuff the other week where like, what are the bounds of a component? Should be like no margin. It should just always cut to the edge so that the parent laying out the component can choose the spacing. Well, if you look at an icon, typically there is white space because you want two different icons to look nice next to each other.
Yeah, well, also too, the context matters for the icon. So like an icon in a menu is almost like an image or something where you don't want those margins. You want to control the layout. Right. But an icon in text and like a title or a paragraph, you want that to behave just like a character would.
Right. So but most icon sets have white space as part of the icons, so that they're you know what I'm saying?
You're saying like in the actual,
it'll be like 32 by 32 pixels, but the thing won't go to the edge of the box, the bounding box.
I see what you're saying now. Yeah,
which is like confusing, you know, or it's like makes it.
Well, I guess the benefit there is like all the icons are the same. They're same height and width, so the same transforms.
Yeah, that is the point, but then it just feels sometimes like getting it looking right next to text is tough. I don't know. I think I just need to, it might be a line height thing. I was just messing with it this morning and I was like having a hard time understanding like how to think about this right, where you have, again, like a learn more with a caret and like, should the caret be aligned with the baseline of the text? Should it be centered? And should the icon source be made in such a way that when it's centered with like flex or whatever, vertically centered with the text, it looks good. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So where's the white space doing the work? Is it in the source of the image or is it in the layout part? So that's, I was just a little confused about that. So I need to look at some sites and see like how they position things. Go ahead. You had a thought?
I mean, I wonder if you're like reaching for an abstraction that doesn't need to be there. Like we
hey, that took that one personally.
Okay, I wonder if we're reaching for an abstraction.
No, you could say me. I've already undone like 9 abstractions I started on this stupid website.
We don't generally use icons. And
No.
we use them in very specific ways. So
Yeah.
I wonder if we can
Just futz it or whatever.
yeah, like, okay, this one's not gonna have a border because it needs to behave this way, and this one is. And
But like caret is a specific one. By the way, when I say caret, I mean CARET, like a little chevron, right? And we have that in the site.
I thought you were talking about the rabbit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Learn more. Follow the rabbit. We already use it in the site view spots. And so I was trying to get it to work good on the homepage, and it just, anyways, I don't know.
Yeah.
I just have to look at how people are positioning things so that they look good, because I was getting confused by it. Another thing about layout on the topic, we have these sections, the pancakes we call them, in the homepage, and it's like paragraph of text, and image, and then like paragraph of text over here, and then image on the other side, kind of flips back and forth. That's like a pretty common layout thing for like a marketing page. You look at like an Apple page, or you look like figma.com. That's how they do it. And it was interesting thinking about what's the best way to do those kinds of layouts. Is it like a grid? Because they stack on mobile. So you have like a text section, and then you have like an image, and they stack on mobile, and then they become like a 2-up grid on desktop. But they're not really like a 2-up grid. They're not really like 50% and 50%, because then you end up like wanting more control, changing the width and the white space between them. And so I happened to open up Figma's in the inspector tools, and they have a similar thing in terms of the overall layout, but they use a grid. So it made me really interested to want to dive into that more.
I think my question here is what, like, the grid seems too vague, because you can have so many different ways you implement the grid. So you can have like the bootstrap version where you have fixed.
No, I mean like CSS Grid.
Oh, CSS
Yeah,
Grid.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
'cause I was going to say bootstrap or like Flexbox or like
So
CSS
when we
Grid.
do grids, normally like the grid component, we do it with like Flexbox and Tailwind, like negative margins to like have gutters. But like Grid has all that stuff built in. So they just, if you like highlight, it's pretty cool too. Like once you highlight something with CSS Grid, like the tool will show you all this stuff.
It is so amazing.
I still haven't even learned it yet, but
first of all, it's really, really confusing. It is really confusing. Grid is in like Tailwind 1.2, I want to say, and I'm very excited for that, because I feel like I'm actually going to start to understand it.
Yeah.
I built a for like the newsletter generator in EmberMap. That's CSS Grid, because it needs to collapse in certain ways, and Grid was the easiest to do that.
Got you.
And man, the dev tool experience was so fun. You get every grid gets outlined in like a different border color.
Yes.
It is unbelievable.
That's awesome. Very cool. So yeah, they basically do that, because how we were using Flex to do the grid with a gutter was exactly that. But like, I guess in CSS Grid, you can literally specify like gutter, and then you just choose a value. So you know how when we were working on that, we wanted the white space to be 40 pixels or whatever it was. And you can just say that, and then like you can tweak it without having to like padding X, negative margin this or whatever. And it can center it. And it's like, this doesn't have to, it can be like, the widths don't have to be. I think like a 50% grid was like the wrong way to think about laying that out, or at least it was not how Figma did it, and it seemed like we were having a little bit of trouble with it. It's working now, but yeah, it's just interesting. Like, I think layout is just hard.
I mean, considering we run into different
layout issues,
or like different learnings every few weeks.
Yes,
yeah. Hey, with Grid, what's the browser support like? Like, is it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right, we can look it up on Can I Use.
Yeah. But if Figma.com uses it, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pretty good sign.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, it's just been kind of fun working on these kinds of pages more, because it's different from like the application UI that we're used to building. It's like marketing UI, and it's different. It's like it is more complex, but it's really cool. Yeah, I'm excited to get that up. Someone just tweeted today, and they were like looking at Mirage JS, and they were like, "Did you see that?" And they're like,
"It
says it's not ready yet." And it's like, I've been thinking about.
Well, I saw that, and I went to miragejs.com, and we just say like sign up for updates, like when the project is ready.
Yeah.
We could just remove when the project is ready.
Yeah.
And I think all that
Yep.
goes away.
We
Also,
should
too,
just ship the homepage.
yeah.
That's what we should
Well,
do.
it's going to be a lot easier to just remove 3 words.
That's true.
In my mind, Mirage has been used with Ember for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
So it's
Totally. And
we're
people
not lying.
Totally. People are using it in React. They're using it in Vue. I know specific people. And then also like someone's actually getting it working with Angular, which requires type definitions. And so there's a big PR in Mirage JS that's going to add like a bunch of types, which is pretty awesome actually. Like Dan Freeman, James C. Davis, right? From
Yeah, he gave the TypeScript talk at EmberConf.
Yep. And Zoltan, I think he's doing Angular now. I think he used to be an Ember developer.
Cool.
And also Chris Kryko has been like chiming in. So like they have all independently been working on like types in their projects with Mirage. And so they're all like agreeing on them. And I don't know about any of that. It's like crazy. It's like 1,000-line PR. So it's like, you would think it wouldn't be like that crazy, right? But
this is like I just don't know. This is a type definition file.
It's a type definition file, which is how you type projects that are not written in TypeScript.
Right. So it's not converting Mirage to TypeScript and actually typing the functions. Right. It's okay, cool.
But they have to agree, and like you need tests because it's like really bad if you have something typed in an incorrect way, and you're in like a TypeScript project that uses strict or whatever, and like the types don't actually match JavaScript, but that's possible because like the types aren't being derived from the source code.
Yeah, the types could be, you could just go in and lie and say, okay.
So, and then like you have tests for all these types. There's like a lot. There's a lot. I of course, ideally, like if you could, I think TypeScript is a great fit for Mirage's source. And I think one day we will start to convert it over. But in the meantime, it helps people who are using TypeScript. And also apparently like if you're in an Angular project, I think everything like, I think it's like you have to have TypeScript.
Interesting. What is so I have 2 questions. First is, does Mirage maybe accepting like arbitrary number of function attributes or function arguments? So like you can pass maybe you can pass a function or a string or
the multi-arity signature of like route handlers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that complicate the typing?
I'm sure it does.
Okay. And then this type file is like not derived from code. So then what's the process for like we change? Yeah, we change.
Someone submits a PR. Well, I think that's where the type tests come in. So like I think if someone went and edited an option and which had an effect on the signature or something, the type test would fail, I think.
Okay.
I guess if they're exhaustive. I don't really know.
Yeah, I wonder how that would work. It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah. We need to do a little deeper diving. Anyways, that's all like on the docket, but like going back to what made us start talking about this was like, is Mirage being used? Is it ready? It is. And, the homepage, we're going back to like this whole marketing triangle or like product triangle thing, which is like, let's get the homepage working. After that, like making some educational content, a little egghead series would be really good. And, but yeah, the project is being used. And then like also just what does 1.0 Mirage JS look like? Probably just matches like Ember CLI Mirage API, just locks it in. And then we can start talking about like what are the changes we want to make. Because like there's a lot of little things that would improve the API a lot based on the last few years of like JavaScript development. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. So I'll be excited to get that done just so that the homepage can be explanatory and reflective of like the actual state of the project. Yeah, that's what we've been working on. That's one thing. I thought there was something else about that project, about the website that we wanted to talk about. Oh, well, we took a week to get a toggle working. We were messing with React Spring. We wanted the equivalent of animated if, and so we made that. But
animated container and animated if.
Yes. And React Spring is like the library we used, and they don't have something like that, but they teach you how to do it in a lower level way. You actually compose animated React Spring, like animates between two values, but it doesn't do measurement. Measurement you can use a hook for from a separate library called React Use Measure. And so that was pretty cool. We learned a lot.
Yeah.
We still have a lot to learn, but I wanted to invest in it because we have some ideas for things we want to add to the Mirage site. So once the homepage is done and there's no bugs and people are using it and stuff, we want to make a little like REPL examples page where you can say like, show me a one-to-many relationship. And then it's just going to like have the little Mirage config and show you what a response looks like. And there's a couple ideas for like animations in the site that would make it easier to understand what's going on. React Spring is pretty interesting, man. Definitely like embraces the React mentality of like sharp tools. Yeah,
well, that's it right there. I think that one of the reasons we spent so long on this, it was like 3 days. I felt like we were leveling up our React knowledge as well. Yeah, just like the way you think about React and the way you think about hooks and all that. Yeah, so I think it was a good exercise.
Definitely. In particular, it's basically for the footer where you sign up for the newsletter, and once you sign up, like the form disappears and then a thank you message shows up. But we wanted to make that like super robust and just it reflows. So like the height that takes up changes, and so you want it to reflow everything. And
it's so funny. Like we had the original homepage had this.
Yeah,
it was just
still has it right now.
Yeah, it still has it right now. It's just with weird like CSS transitions and like on transition end fires a callback that updates state that re-renders a component. It's just not. It's like it's fine, but it's just this. Our code is so much more robust now,
right? And it's aligned with the model, the mental model. It's not imperative. So that's one of the interesting things we found when we were doing this, which was like, you want to like when I click, okay, I need to remeasure and do this thing, but then already you're like, that's not really what you're doing. You don't care about when you click. You care about what state can this be in, and if you can figure that out and delineate all those states, then the libraries like React Spring and React Use Measure can do like the heavy lifting for you. So we get it working in one state from like true to false or whatever, and it toggles and it resizes, and then we like resize the window, and what happens is like the thing goes from like 50 pixels in like the true state to like 60 pixels in the true state, and like React Spring animates it, and you're like, that's weird, like that's not correct. Like if I'm resizing the window, I don't want to animate, like I only want to animate when it's going from true to false. So you want to say like, how do I say animate when going from true to false? But even that you're already wrong, because like you're saying when going, and you're already back into imperative transition land, right? It's interesting because animations are like about transitions, but ideally if you can specify the states, then like the animation library can take care of that, and you don't have that logic in your code. So like, what are all the states? And it's actually not just true false, it's like true.
This thing can be rendered at every pixel width.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Like that's a state.
Exactly. It's true. Yeah, exactly. Like it's true, and we're on a small screen and the thing takes up 100 pixels. It's true, and we're on a large screen, it takes up 50 pixels. And so those are like two different states. And because you're using React Use Measure, which has like a resize observer, which is looking for those things so that it's always up to date, that is technically like a new state that's being triggered. And so if your logic is not truly idempotent in your hook, then you're going to see something that you don't want. So you kind of are, that was what we were going through. And I feel like, you're saying we like leveled up in React. That was the general lesson that we extracted, which is like, instead of trying to force an imperative thing in, we know that the only time that this can happen is when they click the submit button. So let's just do like animation enabled in the click button handler, and then we'll only animate if animation is enabled.
Yeah, and so you can the trick here is you can still do it in like a React way.
Yes,
but it's wrong. So you can still say like set is animating.
Yes,
true.
Yes,
but that's not like I'm describing the in between when I do that.
Exactly.
And so you don't. This is interesting because it's you don't really get feedback that you're doing it wrong, because you can keep
covering it with like duct tape, like plugging the leaky holes with.
You can keep writing React code that is like I'm making air quotes, but like idiomatic React code, I'm using hooks. I'm setting state. Yeah. My component is like it is a function of state, except I'm like I'm not even like thinking about a bunch of those states.
Right.
It's almost like you were talking about the resize observer and how at different screen widths the div changes height.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like something like you use resize observer, and it's almost like you get a warning that says something like, hey, you're using resize observer, and that means that you now need to consider if anything changes height or width based on the window size, you now need to consider these new states.
Dude, it's even more than that, because anything that changes any state of that component or an ancestor is going to cause a re-render, because hooks run every single time. So it's even more than that. Like, this is the whole argument for hooks, was that you write a React component and you write some logic in component did mount and it runs once. So you can get away with doing all sorts of stuff that is not actually a function of state.
Right. Yep.
Whereas hooks often expose flaws in your logic and states you haven't identified and accounted for, because they rerun so often. So even when I started like making this thing into like two different components that were like talking.
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, I get what you're saying. Like hooks actually, yes, 100% agree. They do identify the flaws.
They expose them more often.
Because they're running more.
But you can still avoid.
A lot of times when my hooks are running, I'm not, like, I have a good mental model for why they're running, but like the use measure stuff is a good example. Like, I'm not considering that a new state. I'm just
it's a total black box.
So I want
the fact that it triggers a re-render is actually should be an implementation detail. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Re-render should be implementation details for well-behaving hooks and well-behaving components. So the fact that maybe use measure re-queries the DOM every second. Maybe it uses resize observer to update its state whenever the user resizes the window. Who knows? It shouldn't actually matter. You should be able to, at any moment in a well-designed, well-implemented React application, just call re-render on the entire thing, and the UI should be completely up to date. That's when you can do that, React works best, and that is the way it's designed to use.
I want something that's going to tell me, like, hey, I'm re-rendering and these things are different, and like, did you think about this? And is there a state that you're not considering?
Right.
I don't know. I might just be like wishing.
Well, there could be something that just highlights something when re-renders are triggering. So like you're working on an animation and you're like, oh, this seems to be working pretty well. And then like you like change the breakpoint and you're like, oh wait, like we just ran our animation code again. I didn't really think about that, you know?
Yeah. I really want something that's like,
no, it's funny.
The component is re-rendering now because the width of the screen changed.
Yeah.
Like, did you know this was a new state of your component? And I'd be
right.
like, I would have to scratch my head and be like, yeah, I did. That makes sense.
Right.
But before it happened, I didn't know.
Totally. And like, no, it's actually a good point you raised, which is like, when you go to, let's say you go to implement an animation, you're thinking about the one specific case. And so you're like, oh yeah, I need an effect. Like when did submit goes from false to true, run this code. But that's like completely wrong. That's like the most general, unrestricted, liberal view of what the behavior of this component is, when in reality you want the most restricted, conservative view. You want to say, okay, we're adding an animation here, let's define the one specific state we know, or the two, and everything else actually should like ignore all of this code, because we want this to be idempotent, and like we're going to start with just the two states that we actually know. So like basically, how do you get to the point where your hook code is idempotent and can be run over and over again? It's like not normally how you think about doing it when you first go to write something.
Maybe there's like,
when you go to click a button, a form to submit a button and then trigger a Ajax request, like nothing about that. You're not thinking about idempotence at that point, but like really you kind of should be.
I wonder if there's like, I know in like Haskell, there's a thing called quick check, which you basically say add takes two numbers and returns a number and sums them. And it can like basically scaffold out a whole bunch of tests for like what happens when
it's like generated tests for like every possible. Yeah.
I kind of want that for like a React component where it's like, hey, I'm going to like do a bunch of steps in your component. Like I'm going to fill in the text box. I'm going to click the submit button. But then at some point, I'm just going to call like 60 re-renders in the next 1,000 milliseconds.
Yeah.
And so like I'm going to really like make sure that while your component is getting input and being interacted with, it's going to start re-rendering.
Interesting. Or like you could just say, oh, there's like 4 pieces of state on this component. Here are the valid properties. Like this one can be true or false. This one can be a string. I'm just going to start calling set state on your component with all valid properties and different things. And let's see how it behaves.
Ooh. Yeah.
Because like really what you want is like, this is hard to test manually when we're developing, but when we were developing, like we made a little window.toggle function which would change the state so we could kind of do it easily. But what I really want, first, is like slow down time. Second is to like toggle some state that triggers the state that we care about so the animation goes from one to the other. And then while that's running, have something else happen that would cause a re-render so we can make sure this is truly robust to re-renders. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So that's the stuff that's harder to do. And those are the things that you don't think about that can cause issues. All this being said, when we did identify the states, it was really cool to see the use measure thing working, because I think in a lot of times, if we had written something like this in another, tool, like we wouldn't have thought about the resizing thing. But there was an aspect of it that quote just worked because of it was accounting for every state, and it was really neat to see that.
I really liked when you did you put together like a little table. And it had at the top of the table, the headers were like all the variables, and then every row in that table was like the possible values of those.
Oh,
and so if you had like did submit and
the measurement had happened,
and the measurement, exactly.
Yeah.
This should be the state of the component.
Right.
The next row you did.
Well, that was the way we finally even got to figure out what was going on, because we were so confused, and we were like, all right, what is every possible state that these things can be in?
But I really think that's an awesome approach to take with these. Like even if we opened up Excel in the future and like use that as like a way, use it as a way to like think about how Excel updates, but use Excel to fill in all the states.
Exhaustive list of all the states.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's like a really good. Yeah, that was just really once we did that.
Yes.
Like I feel like there was less guessing.
Yes.
About what is this value? What is this value? Oh, what happens when I do this? Oh,
yes.
Put a debugger there.
Yes.
And it was clear of okay, well here's a state we didn't account for.
Right. In particular, it was hard because use measure. This is one of the. It seems like the hardest class of problems always falls in this bucket, which is you have to render something to know what it is. So use measure, like to measure the DOM, has to be rendered. So the very first pass of your hook of your function, it's not going to know. So use measure has not had a chance yet to calculate, to measure the actual DOM. So you have a state in the beginning.
Yet you're using use measure to figure out the return value of your component in some sense.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. So the very first time you have to account for the state where use measure is like null and your things are auto. So what does that mean for your animation code? Like, what does it mean as that state of your animation code? What is like the from and to there? So pretty interesting. So then like you account for that, you measure it, now you know, and then now you can say, And we ended up having to use a ref to account for the fact that like once we realized you can
you say that as if it's like an admission of failure.
It is.
No, every React component I write has refs.
No, but it shouldn't, man. I just saw someone who teaches React for a living say, here are the things that are like the escape hatches, or like these are the power tools I use in extreme cases, but I try my hardest not to use them until I absolutely need to.
Sure.
And ref is in that bucket for sure.
Okay. I mean, that's fair, but I don't know. Like even like I think of like use previous and use measure, all that stuff uses refs.
Well, that's fine. That's fine.
I don't think we should.
But it's like an implementation detail. We literally have a ref that is looking at the state from the previous render in this one and seeing if something's changed, because that's kind of like the only way we could think of to describe. Because
there's a difference between like is rendering for the first time versus is.
So the form. Let's talk about this. So the form is in 2 states, right? And so
you have true, and then you go to false, and when you go from true to false, you want to animate.
Yeah.
But what if you start out as false? You don't want to animate there. You just want to show the false state.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, you need to know if the previous state was undefined or if the previous state was true.
Right.
Because that's going to affect the animation. That's going to affect the spring.
Right. It's actually, yeah. The reason it makes sense when we finally look at it. There is a lot. We have like a multi-stage animation defined, so that's where this came up. If we had just done it like begin state and end state, it wouldn't have mattered. It would have worked. But we have a multi-stage animation. So just like when I used to do a lot of D3 code, that is imperative code. If you think about a state machine diagram where you have all the states of your application and the lines connecting them. So admin is true, admin is false, submit is true, right? And you have the lines. Like, most of your UI development should be concerned with describing the states, defining the states, and then like you have logic that transitions, but like the transition stuff is just about the state. The rendering comes from state. The rendering doesn't come from the transition, right? That's like the main idea behind declarative rendering, right? So that's why normally if you have anything that's any rendering logic that's derived from transition concerns, you're going to make a mistake. Like I click this thing, now slide down this thing. Like the reason we needed it here though is because the animation is actually about the transition. So if you think about it, if you're going from state to state, like, and you have something that's more sophisticated that describes the transition here, then you need to write more code. Like you need to do more in that case. And so that's why use previous mattered for us, because it was about what the UI looked like during the transition. It was UI as the transition, as opposed to like, that's why UI as a function of state didn't work in our case, if that makes sense. The actual transition changed based on which arrow we were going back and forth from. And so this is just like,
oh, I see what you're saying now.
Because animation is itself like about the transition. It's not about the function of state. It's about the transition. It's different. So like when I was writing D3 code and like you add a column or you remove a column and you want different things to happen, you're writing code about the transition there. So if you somehow have to use more than just like the state, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's because you're writing code about the transition.
Well, okay, I have a question then. So since it's about the transition, should there be like an escape hatch to just go like bananas with imperative code?
I think the way you would do it is like we would take the code that we did and put it into like a declarative hook. What would it look like to make our animation like a declarative hook that truly takes like the two states and can animate between them? And we basically did that, right? We wrote a component that was called like fade between. So that was the answer basically. So I think that's the answer. It's just think about it. So think about it. You open an app like, and it renders the home page, and that's it. That's one state. The app has one single state, and it's basically like the URL, and it renders the whole app. Now you add a fade-in transition to the app. So have you introduced a new state to the app? Well, if that animation takes a second, and you're rendering at 60 frames a second, like you now have like 60 states of your application, right? But from the JavaScript perspective, like it's one state. It's like, app is booted is true. Like that's the only piece of JavaScript state in your whole application, right? But if you add an animation, like how many states can your app actually be in? It's like 60 different frames of that animation, like as it fades in. Opacity is 0, opacity is 1/60, opacity is 2/60. You see what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying.
So it doesn't make sense to put that state into memory and say our UI is a function of state, because that would be like totally impractical.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? So that's why you have an escape patch. It's an imperative escape patch. It's like it's just a transition, but like we don't model that state the same way we model the state that drives most of our UI.
When you said that example, I wanted to just say you have two states. You have like you're animating.
That's fine.
Your final thing,
but you actually have like 60 or 120 or something.
I guess you're right. Yeah.
Think about it. What we said earlier in this episode is at any moment in time, you should be able to stop the world and call re-render on your whole thing. But for animations, that's not true because we don't capture the state. This was like Rich Harris's whole point with the fact that like you have lots of state that's actually not in React, like your cursor position and your mouse position and like the size of the window. So like it's not actually true that you can just completely render your UI from state every time.
Okay, and earlier we did say like the window resize stuff, we don't we don't like think of all those. I mean, I guess we do think of all those states,
well,
but we're not. We wouldn't say like, oh, this component can be in 1,000 different states because the monitor is 1,000 pixels.
Exactly. So there's like a million different states.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah. So it's like you're trying to simplify for the purpose of app development, right? It makes sense to simplify and shrink the state to the lowest possible amount. So that's what we typically do. Like, that's why if any state can be derived from other state, you want to do that. And so that your actual state is like minimal. But sometimes, especially with like things like animations or things that are concerned with like transitions, that's why this code is harder, because we can't write it in the same way. We can't derive it like as a function of state. That's why things like React Spring are so good, because they abstract it and you actually can just say, here's the initial state, here's the final state. We're going to take care of everything in between, the keyframes in between.
So that,
but then
if I have a component, no matter how many times it re-renders while that animation is running, React Spring is going to do the right thing.
And that works because React Spring actually remembers all of its values and all of its re-renders and stuff. So it can be re-rendered and interrupted and stuff. Well, I actually think it animates outside of React, but it does know if the state changes and it affects like
animated.div is, I think, the thing that has a memory.
Exactly. So it's pretty cool. But it's also why we were struggling with that, and why we had to use the ref, and why, I don't feel guilty about the ref. I'm just saying in the course of normal application development, you should not need anything like a use previous,
yes,
or even a use mounted, even though we've needed that as well. But that is like, it's fine. It's not an admission of failure on React's part. It's just the parts of your app that you can't write as a function of state are going to be not as nice and clean, because that's like the best model, and that's the one that React and Ember and everyone embraces. And so, that's just why it was hard.
I like what you're saying. I feel like if I got a new project in 3 weeks and I was like asked, oh, is this a function of state? Is it not? I would just have a hard time like recognizing that.
Well, it's like we have a whole D3 series on EmberMap, and like halfway through the series, it's about wrapping all this imperative code in a declarative interface exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Because from the perspective of the app developer, you want them to think, oh, the profit went from 100 to 500, and like the bar is going to transition. And like, what if it goes from 100 to 500 and then 300? Like, you select 3 different companies while the transition is happening. You need to account for that imperatively in the code itself, in the bar chart.
But you still want the interface to be declarative
Yes.
when I'm rendering the bar chart.
Yes.
Yep.
So maybe that's like a good thing for us to start practicing, which is like, if you were actually building a React app on a team and you saw sprinkles of this imperative stuff everywhere, it makes it harder to like understand what's going on, because you're like the first time we wrote that button with the animations, like we have like effects and layout effects, and it's like lots of a mixture of that. Mm-hmm. Whereas ideally you want like a declarative boundary in the same way.
I mean, when you say that, like this makes a lot of sense, because I can recognize HTML elements,
yes,
like the video element.
Yes.
And I just know, if you ask me how to code a video element component, it would be so like, I would know exactly what to do. I'm going to hide all the imperative stuff inside the component, and then the external interface is playing true, false,
right,
and
exactly,
all the declarative stuff.
Exactly.
So it's easy. Maybe it's just like, because I've written so many of those components, it's easy for me to recognize with this React stuff and the animation stuff that you're talking about. It's just not easy to me. It feels like, I don't know. It feels like I'm like missing something, or I should have like a checklist for identifying these components.
Well, it's just different, because if you are writing D3 code and you're like, on enter, on exit, do this thing, like you're thinking, right? Even those APIs, on enter, on exit, on update, those are about transitions and steps that are happening. But that's what you want when you're doing that, because you need that low level thing to describe precisely what happens when a new element comes in.
That's a pretty good rule, because the same is true with the HTML elements. They have like on time update, on play, on pause. So if I see an on keyword, I just know that I have to like get in this mode.
Right. Exactly. Or like you're doing something and it's almost like you want to learn about use state and it's like you want to learn about use state separately from use ref or use context, or like you want to say, oh, these hooks are good for parts of your app that are functions of state. And then here are some examples of times where you actually have to accommodate for the transition that's happening. Which is why it feels like you want sometimes, like when the user submits the form, run this code, but just do it once and just do it as a result of this action right here. You know, it's like you want to go out of the rendering cycle. You want to go out of it. But then again, like we saw, like sometimes it actually improves it, where if you had just coded that animation as a one-off thing as a result of like a click, but then you had forgot to accommodate for like the resizing. So that's the thing, right? We know the benefits of declarative rendering. The more you can express declaratively, the more unanticipated state transitions the tooling can take care of for you.
Yep.
But when you have to go outside of that paradigm and write imperative code, it can be hard to know exactly how to do it, because the escape hatches like effect and layout effect and ref are still trying to shoehorn themselves into like imperative, into the declarative style. I think there's like this use imperative handle like hook that I haven't looked at yet. But like something like that might have been a lot easier for us to accommodate for this thing. You know what I'm saying? And just say, okay, like this is where we're like escaping out. So like if re-renders happen, we know we don't want to write this code again. So yeah. Like,
cool.
Like I'm thinking like the D3 code, right? The bar chart. You would just, if something's re-rendering, you would just ignore all the D3 code. You wouldn't write D3 code to be able to run again and again, like the actual D3 code. You would just say, no, nothing's changed. We're not going to run this code again. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yes.
Anyways, I don't know if that made any sense, but
no, it helps.
It's back to Rich Harris's point about like the UI as a function of state is like a golden, desirable like paradigm that is like elegant, and for some people, right, this is like the whole goal of this. But then the reality of like stateful UI development is that there's going to be lots of times where that's not actually what you're doing. And so should your tools and frameworks and APIs go all in on that, or should they admit that there's parts of that and make it simpler? So, but again, there's trade-offs. So anyways, it's just kind of interesting to see. Animations are always kind of tricky. They're kind of hard in that way, but it's pretty cool. So I don't remember how we got on this, because I feel like there was something else I wanted to say before we started talking about all this stuff.
Let's see, rolling back, we were talking about building the website.
Yep.
Using Use Spring, how we like that.
Mm-hmm. Sharp tools.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. I think just the final takeaway there was like, with Ember animated, you literally just do like animated if, and that's basically what we wanted. And it was like 2 lines of code in Ember animated, and this was like 3 days and like more than 2 lines of code.
Yeah.
But it's pretty interesting.
Well, also adding to that, that's like, we got this done. I'm happy with the final result. But if we had to do something like Ember animated's sent and receive sprites, like I kind of have an idea for how we would do that.
Well, the thing is, there's
examples.
Could
take 6 months.
No, there's examples of like using a cross-route transitions.
Okay.
So like I would actually feel that's the thing. As nice as the high-level APIs are, there's many times I've worked with tools like Ember animated and felt just stuck because they are so high level. Whereas with Spring, as low level as it is, both when I was using it on my site and with this work, I never felt like I was completely. I mean, that's not really fair. Like there's times where we wanted more documentation and stuff, but there was enough examples that we could just keep going.
Yeah.
We didn't just stop and say, I don't know what to do here. Whereas like I have had that happen to me with Ember animated. Like I have an idea for something I want to do, and I literally don't know what to do besides like trying to read the source code and literally understanding how it works. And I haven't had that yet.
I know, but I've said this a few times. I don't know if that's a function of Ember animated being designed with just holes or which I don't think is the case.
Yeah.
I think Ember animated is robust.
Yeah.
From what I've seen. Yeah, I think the Ember animated has no docs.
Yeah.
That's
examples.
No examples. That's why you're getting stuck. It's not.
I think there might be there's some parts of it. Even I was chatting with Ed about it at EmberConf where, it approached the problem from the outside in. So it said animated if is like the first thing we want, let's say, or animated each, right? And those are amazing things that work extremely well. But React Spring's almost the opposite, where it's like, we don't even care about measuring the DOM. That's not our concern. But it's just like React Spring is literally just stateful transitions on objects. It doesn't even know you're rendering. Well, animated div knows you're rendering, but the core Spring mechanism is like an object with X of 1 to an object with X of 23. That's it. And so it's just the opposite. And so you can apply those to any part of your layout you want. Whereas like, again, Ember Animated has like this concept of animator, which is like a component that it has like a representation. It's just a different thing. I'm not saying that it couldn't be expanded, but yes, of course, it's because a lot of the examples are not there and stuff like that. But I think that also goes back to this. I think there's a reason there's not as many examples, and it's not just because like the React community is bigger.
It's because 2 people know how to use that library.
No, but this is the thing, dude. High level libraries are fundamentally more complex, have more scope, and are harder to understand. Like, think about it.
Yeah.
So I think, again, D3 is very low level. It's like, doesn't come with like a bar chart component out of the box. It's very low level, but like it has a smaller surface area. And so it's harder to make it do what you ultimately want to do, but it's easier to learn and use at the beginning. So I think there is I do not think those are independent variables. Of course, you can make a high level library or API and invest a lot of time in good docs and examples, but I'm just saying it's fundamentally harder. Think how much easier Mirage would be if we didn't have like some of the stuff in there. It wouldn't be as powerful, but it would be,
Yeah, Mirage versus Pretender.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just back to our discussion of the last few weeks. It's like,
I'm not willing to throw away high level libraries because of that. I know. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth.
no. It's about the fact that like the high level. We've had this we talk about this a lot.
Yeah,
it's fine. It's a recurring theme on the show because high level APIs are hard to get right, and so the question is, but they're obviously more useful. Like, there's no question a high level abstraction is way more useful than a low level one, provided it meets your needs.
Okay, but
right?
it's not fair.
Animated if is literally like the perfect thing for what we wanted in that case.
Right. I think if I was arguing against what I'm saying, it's not fair for me to compare the perfect high level API versus the low level thing, because you can't.
It's the real high level API you end up with.
You can't get to that high level API without that low level thing.
Well, that's the question. What's the best way to get to the best high level API? And sometimes people approach it from the outside, from the top, and say, let's start with our ideal picture of a high level API.
Yeah.
And then some people say, listen, what is the minimum lowest level API we need to be able to even achieve the thing we're trying to do here? And it's like a smaller abstraction. And then as we see people build it, like in our app, as we build more like fade betweens and different state things, like we could end up with a high level API that's really great to use. And you could even imagine extracting to a library, right? But we get there through like starting with a low level and iterating. So it's a mix, right? You need some design. You need some top down design to suggest good high level APIs and see how they fall apart. But again, it's more just like in the React community, the de facto approach is going to be, let's start with something that is smaller and lower level and is harder to use to get your desired effect. But
there's some benefits. It encourages experimentation.
Yeah, and in some sense, it's simpler to like learn. In the same way, like React was simpler to learn than Vue, even though it's like harder to build an app with React than Vue. Like, for sure, that's very true. But like when you're using Vue and you're like, oh, is it like this thing or is it called that or whatever? React's API is like is pretty small.
Super
as far as like functions and JSX and props and state go. It's like you can learn that in like a day,
Yeah, just trying to think of like what's the There's like, well, what if we just make like thousands of high level libraries and like one of them will hit, Like, what's that? Like 1,000 monkey or enough. Give enough time, like monkeys can write Shakespeare.
Yeah,
something
but that's
like
not
that.
true. Though.
Okay, we just need to wait like 4 billion more years for the perfect animation library. Okay, all right.
No, there's just like a lot going through my mind right now, but I also think like I know me personally, but I think it's true for a lot of developers, it's tempting to jump to a high level abstraction that feels good. And I think part of like this last year for us has been getting comfortable with like messier code, lower level stuff, admitting we don't know early on. And that's kind of fun too, you know?
Oh man.
I mean, it's been a lot of fun.
I love it. Yeah.
We can talk more about this next time, but like this little CSS and JS library we're using, we're still using Tailwind, but you know, there's like, especially with this marketing stuff, there's times it's very specific. There's no reason to have a general CSS class that falls within your design language. Like you're just making a little picture that has a scrolling thing or that's positioned right here on the homepage. And
I think we have like a background position thing, and we're not going to make a utility for that because it's only used
617 pixels or something.
Yeah.
And it's just great in React. You can install like style components and then you can just use like responsive styles inline. So it's like exactly where you'd want it. That's one of my favorite things about working with React is like the messy stuff is just all contained in a component, whether it's like another component that I need to make to reduce some duplication. I don't have to make it a global component. It's just a little function in that file, some inline styles. It's all in that file. If we redo that, we can just delete that file. There's no global styles anywhere. It's great.
Well, going back to your messy code and it being fun. I mean, taking a function and splitting it up into like 3 functions in the same file, like that's actually really fun.
It is fun. And it's also, I want to say that it's not just fun. I actually think like tinkering is a great way to get to good code and good software. And so tinkering is not just about fun. It's about
I actually think
so I think that's important.
I think that's what makes it so fun.
Yeah.
Is you can it's like faster feedback.
Yes.
What is the fastest way to split this thing into 2 functions? Like literally pasting a function below is going to be faster than creating a new file or whatever your system requires.
Yep. Totally.
And so that feedback that feedback and iteration get you to the result, and that's what's fun.
That's a great way to say it. It's like, it's like if you're building a new page and you want to tinker on the UI, you go to the dev tools and you start doing the CSS properties. That is the first step. That's a legitimate first step. Just because that's not a scalable or architecturally sound way to like do things, it's a first step that gets you to a final step that's better. But so like the better all those in between steps are, and the faster they are, I think it's going to end up with better results. So that's just another kind of fun aspect of working with React.
Nice.
It feels like code. Like it feels like working with normal code where you would just be able to refactor things, but it's all UI, so it's like super fun, you know. Yeah. So that site should be done soon. We didn't even get to talk about a new EmberMap video we have coming out on the router. We have this What's New in Ember series where partly to help even us, but I think it's the best way to learn is to see what's changed in Ember. Now Octane's out, so we're eventually making our way to all the new Octane features, but right now we're in like 3.10, 3.11, going over the motivations and use cases for all the new features that came to Ember last year. And this one is about the route info metadata. So that should be on EmberMap like Monday probably. And so by the time this comes out, it'll definitely be on the site. And that's a free series. So if you're interested in some of those RFCs that have been merged and features have been added to Ember last year, definitely check that out.
Cool.
And maybe we'll talk more about that next week because Ember's router is great, man. It's really great. It's really awesome.
Yep.
It's like, it's like back to we don't know what to do until we render. With the router, it's like enshrining. It's like crystallizing parts where we know things before we render, and it really makes things a lot simpler in many cases.
There's a thing that we always say, whether it's an EmberMap video or like consulting, where we talk about like the router being a choke point.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
Just that mental model. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's great.
It's great. So yeah, we'll talk about that next week.
Cool.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. Happy New Year again. I guess this is like our second podcast in the new year.
Yeah.
We're slacking a little bit.
I had this thought of like, the first time like I email someone in January, like I'm always like, hey, Happy New Year. Hey, Sam, Happy New Year. Blah, 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 blah. I had this thought. It's like, okay, what date? What is a cutoff date for Happy New Year in an email?
It's like February 8th, and you're like, Happy New Year.
No.
Like, oh,
I think once you get to February 1st, it's like it's too late.
Yeah,
saying like January 15th.
Well, it's January 17th right now.
Yeah, I haven't. I think
it's already 1:27 in the afternoon. That's wonderful. I thought it was like 10 a.m. January 15th. That feels pretty good.
Okay.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye.